They told Marcus Thaddeus Reynolds that August 15th would be the day everything changed. The London arbitration had dragged on for 6 months. A maritime shipping dispute worth $200 million that required dissecting every clause of a 40-year-old contract written in 3 languages. Marcus sat in his Mayfair hotel suite at 4 in the morning, staring at the final settlement documents, his eyes burning from fatigue. The Thames glittered below his window, indifferent to the fact that he had just secured the largest single payout in his firm's history. His phone buzzed. Elena, his chief operating officer 3,000 miles away in Manhattan. The voice came through sharp and urgent. Marcus, the Aerovista board just approved the fleet expansion, 47 Boeing units. Your name is on the master lease. Marcus stood and walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. 47 aircraft meant leverage across the entire domestic aviation market. Reynolds Aviation Leasing now controlled enough capacity to influence policy, to set standards, to demand accountability. The weight of that power settled across his shoulders like a physical thing. When do they need the signature? Yesterday. But realistically, you need to be in New York by tomorrow noon. The wire transfer clears at 2 p.m., and if you're not there in person, the deal collapses. Marcus checked his watch. His flight departed Heathrow in 7 hours. Aerovista Flight 214 direct to JFK, arriving at 11:30 a.m. local time. Tight, but manageable. He had flown that route 200 times in the past decade, always in first class, always in seat 1A when he could get it. The bulkhead position gave him legroom to stretch his 6'3" frame, and more importantly, it let him work undisturbed. Book me on 214, confirm 1A if possible. Already done. You checked in 2 hours ago. I used your passport scan from last month. Marcus smiled despite his exhaustion. Elena had worked for him for 8 years and anticipated his needs with unsettling accuracy. He hung up and moved to the closet, pulling out his travel bag. The suite smelled of expensive carpet and the faint ghost of last night's room service, a steak he had barely touched before collapsing into paperwork. He packed methodically. 3 dress shirts, 2 ties, the charcoal suit for the signing. Then he reached for the clothes he actually preferred. A cashmere hoodie, dark gray, purchased from a small shop in Milan for $3,500. To anyone glancing at the label, it would appear to be a generic pullover. The fabric whispered against his skin when he folded it, soft as a secret. Dark denim jeans, Japanese selvage, broken in over 2 years until they fit like a second skin. White leather sneakers, Italian, minimalist. No logos, no branding, no need to announce anything. Marcus had learned early that the world made assumptions based on appearance. When he was 26, fresh out of Yale Law and hungry to prove himself, he had walked into a white shoe law firm in Greenwich wearing a bespoke suit and carrying a briefcase that cost more than most associates made in a month. The senior partner had looked at him, nodded approvingly, and assigned him to a major case. 2 weeks later, Marcus showed up in business casual for a Saturday research session. The same partner had walked past him in the library and assumed he was a paralegal and asked him to fetch coffee. Marcus never forgot the lesson. Power was not in the clothes. Power was in the contracts, the signatures, the quiet phone calls that moved mountains. After he made his first $10 million, he started dressing down deliberately. The people who mattered knew who he was. The people who did not matter revealed themselves quickly. He showered, shaved, dressed in a simple white t-shirt and black joggers for the flight to the airport. The hoodie and jeans waited in his carry-on. He would change before boarding, a ritual that marked the transition from one world to another. London was business. New York was home. The flight between them was a liminal space where Marcus could exhale, read a book, let his mind go quiet. The car service arrived at 5:30. The driver, a Ghanaian man named Kwame who had driven Marcus a dozen times before, loaded the bag without comment and navigated the pre-dawn streets toward Heathrow. They spoke briefly about the weather, the traffic, the peculiar stillness of London before sunrise. Kwame had a son studying engineering at Imperial College. Marcus had quietly paid the tuition 2 years ago after learning the family was struggling. Kwame did not know. Marcus preferred it that way. Terminal 5 loomed ahead, a cathedral of steel and glass. Marcus thanked Kwame, slipped him 200 pounds, and walked through the sliding doors into the controlled chaos of international departure. The August heat had not yet descended, but the terminal thrummed with the energy of 5,000 people trying to leave Britain before the weekend. Marcus joined the queue for business class check-in, his carry-on slung over one shoulder, his boarding pass already loaded on his phone. The woman behind the counter was in her early 40s, blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, smile professional but tired. She glanced at his phone, scanned the barcode, and then paused. Her eyes flicked to his face, back to the screen, then to his face again. "Can I see your passport, please?" Marcus handed it over without comment. This happened sometimes. The photograph was 10 years old, taken when he was 32 and carrying 15 fewer pounds of muscle. His hairline had receded slightly since then, and he wore a beard now, close-cropped and flecked with gray. But the eyes were the same, dark and steady, and the cheekbones were unmistakable. The woman studied the passport, tilting it under the light as if checking for forgeries. Marcus kept his expression neutral, his hands loose at his sides. He had been through this dance before. "This doesn't look like you. It was taken in 2014. People change." She tapped something into her computer, frowning. "Do you have another form of identification?" Marcus reached into his wallet and produced his New York driver's license, his American Express Centurion card, and his Reynolds Aviation Leasing corporate ID. He laid them on the counter in a neat row, each one bearing his name, his face, his authority. The woman examined each item, her frown deepening. "I'll need to call a supervisor." Marcus glanced at his watch. He had 4 hours before boarding. This was an inconvenience, not a crisis. He stepped aside and let the next passenger proceed while the woman picked up a phone and spoke in low tones. Around him, the terminal pulsed with motion. Families herded children toward security. Business travelers juggled laptops and coffee cups. A group of college students laughed too loudly, drunk on the freedom of summer break. The supervisor arrived, a man in his 50s with silver hair and a crisp uniform. He examined Marcus's documents with the same skeptical intensity, holding the passport up to the light, comparing the photograph to Marcus's face with exaggerated scrutiny. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the dull ache of being doubted for no reason beyond the fact that his face did not match whatever mental image these people carried. The supervisor handed back the documents. "Everything appears to be in order. Thank you for your patience, Mr. Reynolds." The woman printed his baggage tag without meeting his eyes. Marcus took it, nodded once, and walked toward security. Behind him, he heard the woman whisper to a colleague, her voice just loud enough to carry, "Watch that one." The words landed like a stone in his gut. Marcus kept walking, his stride even, his face expressionless. He had heard variations of that phrase his entire life. Watch him, keep an eye on him, make sure he doesn't steal anything. The suspicion was ambient, a low hum beneath every interaction, so constant that Marcus had learned to tune it out the way city dwellers learn to ignore traffic noise. But sometimes, on days when he was tired or stressed or simply human, the hum broke through and reminded him that no amount of money or success could erase the color of his skin. Security was worse. Marcus joined the line for business class passengers, a shorter queue that moved quickly under normal circumstances. But when he reached the front, the TSA officer, a white man in his 30s with a buzz cut and a bored expression, waved him toward the additional screening area. "Random selection, sir. Step this way." Marcus obeyed. He had flown enough to know that arguing only made things worse. He placed his bag on the inspection table, removed his laptop and tablet, took off his shoes. Another officer, a woman with sharp features and hands that moved with mechanical efficiency, swabbed his belongings for explosive residue. She ran the swab through a machine, waited for the beep, then swabbed again and again. Is there a problem? Standard procedure. Marcus stood with his arms slightly away from his sides while a third officer waved a wand over his body. The wand beeped near his pocket. Marcus removed his phone and wallet, placed them in a tray, submitted to another scan. Clear. He gathered his belongings, repacked his bag, laced his shoes. The entire process took 12 minutes. Behind him, 3 white passengers moved through the standard checkpoint in under 90 seconds. He found a quiet corner near his gate and sat down, pulling out his laptop. Elena had sent him the final contract language for the Aerovista deal, and he needed to review it one more time before the signing. The document was dense, 140 pages of terms and conditions that governed the lease of 47 Boeing 777 aircraft over a 15-year period. Buried in Section 14, Clause B was the language Marcus had insisted on including. A provision allowing Reynolds Aviation Leasing to revoke operational authorization if the lessee created a discriminatory environment toward any board member or protected class of passengers. His attorney had questioned the clause. Too broad, Marcus. You're giving yourself unilateral power to ground planes. That's going to raise red flags. Marcus had been firm. The clause stays, if Aerovista wants my planes, they agree to my terms. Now sitting in Heathrow with the taste of suspicion still bitter in his mouth. Marcus reread the clause and felt a grim satisfaction. Power without accountability was tyranny. He had built his fortune by ensuring that the people who rented his assets understood they were guests, not owners, and that their privilege could be revoked at any moment. 2 hours before boarding, Marcus walked to the first-class lounge. The entrance was marked by frosted glass doors and a small desk where a young woman in a tailored blazer checked membership cards. Marcus approached, his Centurion card already in hand. The woman smiled and scanned his card, then glanced at her screen. Her smile faltered. She looked at Marcus, then at the screen again, then back at Marcus with an expression that hovered between confusion and suspicion. Are you sure you're in the right lounge? Marcus kept his voice even. This is the first-class lounge for Aerovista, correct? Yes, but... She paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Can I see your boarding pass? He showed her his phone. Seat 1A, first class, flight 214 to JFK. The woman studied it, her brow furrowed, and then called over her manager, a man in his 40s with a receding hairline and an air of weary authority. The manager examined Marcus's card and boarding pass with the same exaggerated care, as if expecting to find evidence of fraud. Everything checks out. Welcome, Mr. Reynolds. The woman flushed and stepped aside. Marcus walked past her into the lounge, a space of leather chairs and muted lighting and complimentary champagne that cost more per bottle than most people earned in a day. He poured himself a glass of sparkling water and sat by the window, watching planes taxi across the tarmac. His phone buzzed with messages from Elena, updates on the wire transfer and the board meeting and a dozen other details that required his attention. He answered them mechanically, his mind elsewhere, 3 times. 3 separate checkpoints, 3 separate moments where someone had looked at him and decided he did not belong. Marcus had flown hundreds of thousands of miles, accumulated enough status with airlines to qualify for private jet service, carried a card that granted him access to the most exclusive spaces in the world. None of it mattered when faced with the reflexive assumption that a black man in casual clothes could not possibly be who he claimed to be. He thought about the arbitration in London, the 6 months of grinding work that had culminated in a victory worth $200 million. He thought about the Aerovista deal, the 47 planes that would cement his company's dominance in the leasing market. He thought about the speech he had given at Yale Law School 3 years ago. standing in front of 200 students and telling them that success was the best revenge against a world that doubted you. But sitting in the lounge watching a barista prepare coffee for a white businessman without asking for his membership card, Marcus felt the exhaustion creep in. Not the physical fatigue of 6 months in London, but the deeper weariness of living in a body that required constant proof of its legitimacy. He closed his eyes and let himself imagine, just for a moment, what it would feel like to move through the world without suspicion, to be assumed innocent until proven guilty, to have his word accepted without the need for 3 forms of identification. The intercom crackled. Aero Vista Flight 214 to New York JFK is now boarding at Gate 47. All passengers holding first-class tickets are invited to board at this time. Marcus stood, drained the last of his water, and walked to the gate. The jet bridge stretched ahead of him, a tunnel connecting one world to another. He had 7 hours before landing in New York, 7 hours to rest and prepare for the deal that would define his career. He stepped onto the plane, nodded to the lead flight attendant who stood at the entrance with a practiced smile, and made his way to seat 1A. The cabin smelled of new leather and recycled air and the faint chemical tang of industrial cleaning solution. Marcus stowed his carry-on in the overhead bin and settled into his seat, buckling the seatbelt and pulling out his book, a dog-eared thriller from the 1980s about Cold War espionage. He had read it 3 times before and found comfort in its familiar rhythms, the way the protagonist navigated a world of shifting loyalties and hidden motives. The flight attendant appeared beside him, a woman in her early 50s with auburn hair streaked with gray and a smile that looked painted on. Her name tag read Evelyn Pritchard, Senior Cabin Lead. She held a tray with a hot towel and a glass of champagne. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Reynolds. Can I offer you a pre-departure beverage? Water, please." Still, no ice. Evelyn's smile tightened imperceptibly. She replaced the champagne with a bottle of Evian and handed him the towel. Marcus wiped his hands and face, the heat of the cloth easing some of the tension from his neck and shoulders. He returned the towel and opened his book, signaling his desire for solitude. But Evelyn lingered, her gaze flicking from Marcus to the seat assignment on her tablet and back again. She tapped the screen twice, her frown deepening. "Excuse me, sir. Can I see your boarding pass one more time?" Marcus looked up, his patience beginning to fray. He had already shown his boarding pass to the gate agent, the woman at the lounge entrance, the supervisor at check-in. He unlocked his phone and displayed the barcode. Evelyn scanned it with a handheld device, waited for the beep, then scanned it again. "Is there a problem?" "No, no problem. Just confirming. Thank you." She walked away, her heels clicking against the floor, and Marcus returned to his book. Around him, the cabin filled with passengers. A couple in their 60s settled into seats 2C and 2D, speaking in low tones about their grandchildren. A man in his 40s took seat 3A, already on his phone, barking orders to someone on the other end about quarterly earnings. The actress from 2F arrived late, oversized sunglasses hiding her face, a cashmere scarf wrapped around her neck despite the August heat. Marcus read 3 pages before the commotion started. A voice, nasal and sharp, cut through the ambient hum of boarding. "I don't care what the computer says. I always sit in 1A. Always." Marcus did not look up. He turned a page and kept reading, the protagonist in his book preparing to infiltrate an East German intelligence network. But the voice grew louder, closer, impossible to ignore. "Do you know who my father is? Senator Ashford Whitmore. I am not sitting in row 8. I am sitting in 1A. Marcus sighed and placed his finger on the page to mark his place. He glanced toward the galley and saw a young man, probably 30, dressed in a suit that was too tight and too blue, electric cobalt screaming new money. Sunglasses perched on his head despite being indoors, leather briefcase clutched like a weapon. Ethan Ashford Whitmore. Marcus recognized the name from the business press, the senator's son who had inherited a trust fund and parlayed it into a series of failed tech investments. Evelyn stood between Ethan and the cockpit, her voice strained but professional. "Mr. Whitmore, your assigned seat is 8B. It's a very comfortable. I don't do row 8. I don't sit near the galley. I want 1A. Ethan pointed directly at Marcus. The gesture was crude, accusatory, as if Marcus were a stain on the upholstery that needed removing. Marcus met Ethan's eyes, his expression neutral, and waited. Evelyn glanced at Marcus, then back at Ethan, her discomfort palpable. "Sir, Mr. Reynolds checked in 2 hours before you. He has a valid ticket for 1A. I can offer you several alternatives." "I don't want alternatives. I want that seat." The cabin fell silent. The couple in row 2 stopped talking. The businessman on his phone ended his call. The actress lowered her magazine. Everyone watched, waiting to see how Evelyn would resolve the situation, how Marcus would respond, whether the confrontation would escalate or dissolve. Marcus closed his book and set it on the armrest. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood, his full height now visible, 6'3" of controlled calm. Ethan took a half step back, his bravado flickering. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Ethan recovered quickly, puffing out his chest. "No misunderstanding, buddy. You're in my seat." Marcus held up his phone, the boarding pass clearly displayed. "Seat 1A, assigned and confirmed. I paid full price for this ticket." "Yeah, well, plans change. I'm VIP status. My family's corporate account is worth millions to this airline. You look like you're just here on miles or some employee pass." The words hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the dull roar in his ears that came whenever someone decided his worth based on his appearance. He kept his voice low and steady. "I'm not moving." Ethan turned to Evelyn, his voice rising. "Are you hearing this? Get him out of my seat." Evelyn looked at Marcus, her eyes pleading. "Mr. Reynolds, if I could just have a word with you privately, we can speak right here." "Sir, please. We have a bit of a situation. Mr. Whitmore has priority status that requires specific accommodation. I have a seat available in Premium Economy, row 12. It has extra legroom, and I'd be happy to offer you a voucher for $500 toward future travel." Marcus stared at her, the full weight of the moment settling into clarity. She was asking him to move from first class, which he had paid for, to economy, so that a man who had checked in late and was currently shouting at everyone could have his preferred seat. Not because of any operational necessity, not because of safety, but because Ethan Whitmore was loud and white and connected, and Marcus was quiet and black and therefore expendable. "Let me make sure I understand. You want me to move from the seat I paid for, the seat I checked into hours ago, to accommodate him because his father is a senator." "It's not just that, Mr. Reynolds. It's a logistical overbooking error. Technically, Mr. Whitmore's ticket code overrides." Marcus held up a hand. "Stop. Don't lie to me about ticket codes. I know exactly how airline reservations work. I paid full fare." "I am seated. The contract of carriage is executed the moment I board this aircraft. You have no legal grounds to move me unless I pose a threat to the safety of this flight." Ethan laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Safety? You're a threat to my comfort, pal. And honestly, you don't look like you belong up here anyway. How did you even afford this ticket? Miles? Employee discount? Some kind of charity upgrade?" Marcus kept his eyes on Evelyn, refusing to engage with Ethan's taunts. "Is that the airline's official position, Evelyn? That I don't look like I belong in first class?" Evelyn paled. "No, of course not. It's just—" "Mr. Reynolds, please. If we don't resolve this, we miss our departure slot. The captain is already asking what the holdup is. If you just move, we can sort out a full refund later. Please don't make this difficult. I'm not the one making this difficult." Ethan stepped forward, his face inches from Marcus's, and lowered his voice to a harsh whisper. "Listen to me. I don't know how you got this ticket, but you're going to get up, grab your little backpack and walk to the back where you belong. Or I'm going to have security drag you off. And trust me, looking like you do, the cops aren't going to ask for your side of the story. The cabin seemed to contract, the air thick and electric. Marcus did not blink. He memorized Ethan's face, the sneer, the entitlement, the casual cruelty. He memorized the way Evelyn looked at the floor, choosing silence over justice. He memorized the way the other passengers watched, some with sympathy, most with discomfort, none willing to intervene. "Did you hear that, Evelyn?" Evelyn said nothing. Her hands gripped her tablet, knuckles white. Marcus looked past her to the young flight attendant standing near the galley. A man in his 30s with Asian features and kind eyes that currently reflected only guilt. The name tag read Desmond Yamamoto, Junior Attendant. Desmond had heard everything. Marcus could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way he looked everywhere except at Marcus. "Did you hear what he just said?" Desmond opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Evelyn for guidance. Evelyn shook her head almost imperceptibly. Desmond looked down. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He extracted a business card, plain white with embossed black lettering. Marcus Thaddeus Reynolds, Reynolds Aviation Leasing, Managing Partner. He handed it to Evelyn. "You should hold on to this. You're going to need it in about 10 minutes. Evelyn took the card, barely glancing at it before slipping it into her pocket. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm giving you one last chance. Please move to row 12 or I will call the captain and have you removed from this aircraft. Then call the captain." Evelyn's face hardened. She turned and walked toward the cockpit, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. Ethan smirked and started to sit down in Marcus's vacated seat. Marcus did not move from the aisle, forcing Ethan to squeeze past him. Their shoulders brushed. Ethan muttered something under his breath, a slur Marcus did not fully catch but understood in his bones. Marcus returned to his seat and buckled his seatbelt. He picked up his book and opened it to the marked page, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Around him, the other passengers whispered, their voices low and urgent. The actress in 2F had her phone out, recording. Good. Let her record. Let the world see. The cockpit door opened and Captain Dalton Mercer emerged, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and a belly that strained against his uniform shirt. He surveyed the cabin with the air of a feudal lord inspecting his domain, his eyes landing on Marcus with cold assessment. "What's the problem here?" Evelyn hurried to his side, speaking in low tones and gesturing toward Marcus. The captain listened, nodded, and walked down the aisle until he stood directly in front of seat 1A. He crossed his arms, his posture radiating authority. "Sir, I understand there's been a disagreement about seating." Marcus looked up from his book. "There's no disagreement. I'm in my assigned seat. Mr. Whitmore checked in late and wants my seat. Your flight attendant is trying to accommodate him by moving me to economy. I've declined. On my aircraft, I'm the law. My crew says you're a problem. That's enough for me. You have 60 seconds to comply or you're removed. Captain, with respect, I suggest you check the passenger manifest. I'm in my correct seat. If you remove me without cause, you're violating federal regulations and the contract of carriage. I don't need to check anything. My crew's word is final. 60 seconds. The captain turned and walked back toward the cockpit. Marcus watched him go, then pulled out his phone. His fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency, opening an app with a black icon and a gold scale logo. The app connected him directly to the operations center of Reynolds Aviation Leasing, a secure line that bypassed customer service and legal departments and went straight to the people who controlled the airworthiness certificates of every plane in his fleet. He pressed dial. The call connected on the first ring. A woman's voice, calm and professional, filled his ear. Reynolds Aviation Operations. Authentication required. This is Marcus Reynolds. Authorization code Victor 2 Alpha 9. Confirmed. What's your status, Mr. Reynolds? I'm on asset Bravo 777448. Registration November 884 Victor X-Ray. Aero Vista Flight 214 out of Heathrow. Copy. I have the asset on screen. What's the nature of the call? I'm declaring a Code 14 breach. Racial discrimination and assault against a board member. I am being forcibly removed from my paid seat by the cabin crew and captain. I want the airworthiness certificate suspended. Ground this aircraft, revoke the insurance. Now! There was a pause, the faint click of keys being typed. Sir, the aircraft is currently at the gate. Passengers are boarding. Are you certain you want to invoke Code 14? I'm certain. The crew is complicit. The environment is hostile. Pull the authorization. Understood. Initiating revocation protocol. Estimate 2 minutes for full system lockdown. The cockpit will receive notification immediately. Marcus ended the call and placed his phone face down on the armrest. Ethan, still standing in the aisle trying to convince Evelyn to physically remove Marcus, had not noticed. The captain had disappeared into the cockpit. Desmond stood frozen by the galley, his face pale. The actress in 2F leaned forward, her phone still recording, her expression a mix of horror and fascination. The seconds ticked by. Marcus counted them silently, his heartbeat steady, his breathing even. He had played this scenario in his head 1,000 times, the moment when someone pushed him too far and he used the power he had spent 2 decades accumulating. He had always wondered if he would hesitate, if some part of him would flinch at wielding such absolute authority. But sitting in seat 1A, his body still thrumming with the indignity of being told he did not belong, Marcus felt no hesitation, only clarity. The cockpit door flew open. Captain Mercer stumbled out, his face flushed, holding a tablet that displayed a cascade of red warning lights. Behind him, the co-pilot appeared, younger, confused, staring at his own screen with mounting panic. What the hell is happening? Mercer did not answer. He stared at the tablet, then at Marcus, then back at the tablet, his mouth opened and closed, no sound emerging. The co-pilot spoke into his headset, his voice rising. Tower, we have a system failure. Airworthiness certificate shows revoked. Flight plan deleted. Insurance status void. Request immediate guidance. Evelyn rushed to the captain's side. Captain, what's wrong? Mercer turned to her, his voice shaking. Who is the passenger in 1A? Evelyn pulled out her tablet and scrolled through the manifest. Marcus Reynolds. Business address, New York. Why? Mercer's face went from red to white. His hands trembled as he gripped the tablet. He looked at Marcus, and for the first time, fear replaced arrogance in his eyes. You did this. Marcus closed his book and stood. He met the captain's gaze without blinking, his voice calm and cold. I told you to check the manifest. You chose not to. Now you know who I am. The intercom crackled to life. Aero Vista Flight 214, this is Heathrow Tower. You are not cleared for departure. Return all passengers to the gate. Repeat. Return to gate immediately. Your aircraft registration has been flagged as non-operational. Ethan finally noticed the chaos, his smirk fading. What's going on? Marcus picked up his carry-on from the overhead bin and slung it over his shoulder. He walked past Evelyn, past the captain, past Ethan, and stopped at the exit door. He turned back to face the cabin, every passenger now staring at him with expressions ranging from confusion to awe to terror. His voice carried clear and measured through the silence. My name is Marcus Thaddeus Reynolds. I am the managing partner of Reynolds Aviation Leasing. Aerovista Airlines does not own this aircraft. They lease it from my company. Under the terms of our master lease agreement, I have the authority to revoke operational authorization when the lessee creates a discriminatory environment. Your flight attendant, Miss Pritchard, and your captain, Mr. Mercer, chose to remove me from my paid seat based solely on my appearance and the assumption that I could not afford to be here. Mr. Whitmore over there used a racial slur and threatened me with violence. I warned you this was a mistake. You didn't listen. He looked directly at Evelyn, whose face had gone the color of ash. "This flight is canceled. This plane is grounded. And all of you are about to learn a very expensive lesson about dignity." Marcus stepped off the aircraft and walked up the jet bridge, his footsteps echoing in the sudden, absolute silence behind him. Behind him, the cabin erupted into chaos, passengers shouting questions, Evelyn collapsing into a seat, the captain screaming into his headset, Ethan demanding explanations from anyone who would listen. But Marcus did not look back. He had delivered the first blow, and the fight had only just begun. The gate area transformed into a war zone within minutes. Marcus stood at the desk, his carry-on at his feet, watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows, as ground crew swarmed the aircraft like ants on a carcass. Fuel trucks reversed, catering vehicles disconnected. The jet bridge retracted halfway, then stopped, caught between departure and arrival, a physical manifestation of the airline's paralysis. Behind him, passengers poured off Flight 214, their voices rising in a cacophony of confusion and rage. A businessman in his 60s shouted into his phone about missing a merger meeting. A young mother clutched her toddler and demanded answers from a gate agent who looked ready to burst into tears. The actress from 2F swept past, sunglasses now serving their intended purpose, shielding her from recognition as she speed-dialed her publicist. Marcus's phone vibrated. Elena's name flashed on the screen. "Please tell me you didn't just ground a transatlantic flight." "I did exactly that." Her sigh carried the weight of 8 years watching Marcus make calculated moves that terrified everyone around him. "Garrett Aldridge has been calling every 3 minutes. The Aerovista CEO. He's losing his mind. Tell him I'll speak to him when I'm ready, not before." "Marcus, the board meeting is in 6 hours. If you're not in New York, I'll be there. Book me on the next available flight, any airline except Aerovista." The sound of typing filled the brief silence. "Done. British Airways leaves in 90 minutes. I'm upgrading you to first, but Marcus, listen to me. The video is already online." "What video?" "The actress filmed everything. The confrontation, the racial slur, you making the phone call, the captain's face when the system shut down. It's on Twitter. 400,000 views in 20 minutes. Marcus closed his eyes. He had known someone would record it. The actress had been obvious, her phone angled toward the altercation with professional precision. But hearing that the evidence now circulated in the digital bloodstream, replicating and spreading beyond his control, brought a strange mix of vindication and dread. Let it spread. The truth doesn't need my permission. The Aerovista lawyers are going to argue you overreacted, that you had other options. I had 3 options: accept discrimination, escalate to violence, or use the power I've earned. I chose the third. If that makes them uncomfortable, good." He hung up and turned to find Evelyn Pritchard standing 10 feet away, flanked by 2 airport security officers. Her face was blotched with red, her carefully applied makeup streaking where she had rubbed her eyes. Behind her, Captain Mercer hovered, his uniform jacket unbuttoned, his swagger replaced by the hunched posture of a man calculating the distance to the nearest exit. "Mr. Reynolds, I need to speak with you." Marcus waited. Evelyn took a tentative step forward, glancing at the security officers as if drawing courage from their presence. Her voice trembled. "I want to apologize. I didn't know who you were. If you had known I owned the plane, you would have treated me with respect. But you didn't know. So you assumed I was someone you could bully. That's the problem, Evelyn. Respect shouldn't require a net worth. I was trying to de-escalate the situation. Mr. Whitmore was being difficult, and I thought if I could just... You thought wrong. You chose him over me because he was loud and white and threatened your corporate metrics. I was quiet and black and therefore disposable. You made your choice, now live with it." Evelyn's face crumpled. "Please, Mr. Reynolds, I have 2 kids in college. I've been with Aerovista for 28 years. This job is everything." "Then you should have done it better." Marcus picked up his bag and walked past her toward the security checkpoint, leaving Evelyn standing in the wreckage of her career. One of the officers called after him. "Sir, we need to take a statement. There's been an allegation of assault." Marcus stopped and turned. "Against whom?" "Against you. Mr. Ethan Whitmore claims you threatened him and made contact." "I see. And where is Mr. Whitmore now?" The officer gestured toward a seating area near the gate, where Ethan paced back and forth, his phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesticulating wildly. Marcus could not hear the words, but the body language screamed desperation. The officer continued, his tone apologetic. "We have to investigate all claims, sir. If you could just come with us." "Officer, my name is Marcus Reynolds. I own the aircraft Mr. Whitmore was just removed from. I have witnesses who can testify that he used a racial slur, threatened me with violence, and demanded I be removed from my seat. I made one phone call to my own operations center, exercising my legal right as the lessor of that aircraft. I never touched Mr. Whitmore. I never raised my voice. If he's claiming otherwise, I suggest you review the video that's currently going viral on social media. It shows everything." The officer hesitated, glancing at his partner, a woman in her 40s with a skeptical expression. She stepped forward. "We've seen the video, Mr. Reynolds, but we still need a formal statement from you." "It's procedure." "Fine. I'll give you a statement, but first I want Mr. Whitmore charged with assault." The female officer frowned. "Assault? The video doesn't show any physical contact. It shows him invading my personal space, threatening me, and using language designed to provoke a violent response. In many jurisdictions, that constitutes assault. But let's be honest, officer, if I were white and Mr. Whitmore were black, and he had said those things to me, would you be questioning whether charges were appropriate?" The silence stretched. The male officer looked at his feet. The female officer's jaw tightened, but she nodded slowly. "Point taken. Let's all go to the security office and sort this out properly." They walked through the terminal, Marcus flanked by the officers, Evelyn trailing behind like a ghost. Passengers stared, some recognizing Marcus from the video, others simply drawn to the spectacle of authority in motion. A teenager held up his phone, filming, his eyes wide with the thrill of witnessing something that would define his social media clout for weeks. Marcus kept his gaze forward, his stride even, refusing to give the cameras anything but composure. The security office was a windowless room with fluorescent lighting and the institutional smell of old coffee and stress. A desk sergeant, a black woman in her 50s with graying hair and eyes that had seen every variation of human stupidity, looked up from her paperwork as they entered. Her name tag read Detective Sergeant Valencia Martinez. "What do we have?" The male officer explained the situation, his words careful and procedural. Martinez listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she turned her attention to Marcus. "Mr. Reynolds, I've already watched the video. Watched it 3 times, actually. My daughter sent it to me. She's at Howard Law. Says you're a legend for what you did." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "Your daughter has good taste in law schools. She also says you could have handled this differently. Filed a complaint after landing. Let the lawyers sort it out. Why ground the plane? Because complaints get buried. Lawyers take years. Passengers like me get erased from the record while the Ethan Whitmores of the world continue terrorizing people with impunity. I had the power to stop it immediately, so I did. If that makes me reckless, so be it." Martinez leaned back in her chair, studying him. "You know this is going to cost Aerovista tens of millions." "I know. You know Ethan Whitmore's father is a sitting senator." "I know that too. And you don't care. I care deeply. I care that 847 other passengers have been profiled by Aerovista in the last 2 years, using a system designed by their regional vice president to flag people based on race, clothing, and zip code. I care that Captain Mercer has been flying for 35 years and never once questioned his crew when they removed a passenger. I care that Evelyn Pritchard has spent 28 years perfecting the art of polite racism. What I don't care about is protecting the feelings of people who profit from discrimination. Martinez nodded slowly. She pulled out a tablet and slid it across the desk. Write your statement. Be specific. And Mr. Reynolds, thank you for not making my job harder by actually hitting someone. Marcus took the tablet and began typing. He detailed every moment from check-in to his exit from the aircraft, every microaggression, every assumption, every failure of the system designed to treat him as a customer and instead treated him as a problem. His fingers moved quickly, translating rage into documentation, emotion into evidence. When he finished, the statement ran to 4 pages. Martinez read it, nodded, and saved it to the system. I'm going to recommend charges against Mr. Whitmore for harassment and making terroristic threats. The racial slur combined with the threat of police violence meets the threshold. Captain Mercer and Ms. Pritchard will face administrative action from the FAA and the airline. But Mr. Reynolds, you need to understand something. This isn't over. They're going to come at you hard. Let them. Ethan was ushered in 15 minutes later, his suit rumpled, his hair disheveled, his eyes darting between Marcus and Martinez like a cornered animal. The bravado from the plane had evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization that his father's name was not a shield against consequences. Mr. Whitmore, we've reviewed the video and taken Mr. Reynolds' statement. I'm placing you under arrest for harassment and making terroristic threats. Ethan's face went white. You can't be serious. I didn't threaten anyone. I was just trying to get my seat. You told Mr. Reynolds, and I quote, I'm going to have security drag you off, and trust me, looking like you do, the cops aren't going to ask for your side of the story. That's a threat, Mr. Whitmore. And given the context of racial animus, it rises to the level of a hate crime enhancement. My father will hear about this. Your father has already been notified. His office released a statement 40 minutes ago, disavowing your actions and stating that you do not represent his views or values. You're on your own. Ethan lunged toward Marcus, his face contorted with fury. You did this. You ruined my life over a seat, a goddamn seat. The male officer grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him back. Marcus remained seated, his expression unchanged. I didn't ruin your life, Ethan. You did that the moment you decided my humanity was worth less than your convenience. They cuffed Ethan and let him out, his protests echoing down the corridor until a door closed and silence returned. Martinez turned to Marcus. You're free to go. Your flight leaves in an hour. Gate 22. Marcus stood and extended his hand. Martinez shook it, her grip firm. One more thing, Mr. Reynolds. That clause in your lease agreement, Code 14, I looked it up while you were writing your statement. That's some forward-thinking contract language. I learned early that power without accountability is just tyranny in a suit. Well, you just held an entire airline accountable. Let's see if it sticks. Marcus left the security office and made his way to Gate 22, where British Airways Flight 117 to JFK was already boarding. The gate agent, a young man with a professional smile and no recognition in his eyes, scanned Marcus's boarding pass and welcomed him aboard without hesitation. The difference was immediate and stark. No extra questions, no suspicion, just service. He settled into seat 2A, the equivalent of 1A on a different aircraft, and pulled out his phone. The video had metastasized beyond Twitter. It was on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Reddit, every platform that trafficked in viral outrage. The headlines multiplied. Black CEO grounds plane after racist confrontation. Senator's son arrested following airline incident. Aero Vista stock plummets 18% amid discrimination scandal. Elena called as the plane pushed back from the gate. You need to see the news. CNN, Fox, MSNBC. They're all running the story. You're trending #1 worldwide. I'm about to take off. Brief me when I land. Marcus Garrett Aldridge is threatening to sue you for tortious interference. He's saying you cost the airline $340 million in lost revenue, rebooking fees, and reputation damage. Then he should have trained his staff not to be racist. Tell our lawyers to prepare a countersuit. Discrimination, breach of contract, systemic violations of federal civil rights law. And Elena? Find out who Victor Sterling is, the regional VP? Yes, he created the passenger profiling system. I want every email, every memo, every policy document with his name on it. If we're going to war, I want ammunition. The flight attendant appeared, a woman in her 30s with warm eyes and a genuine smile. She offered Marcus a glass of champagne. He accepted, the bubbles cold and sharp on his tongue. The cabin doors closed. The engines spooled up. The plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the sky, London falling away beneath them. A city of 8 million people who would wake tomorrow to the story of a man who refused to move. 7 hours passed in a blur of work and restless half-sleep. Marcus reviewed contracts, answered emails, and monitored the escalating media storm through the satellite Wi-Fi. The video had been dissected frame by frame, every expression analyzed, every word transcribed and debated. Legal scholars weighed in on the validity of Code 14. Aviation experts questioned whether Marcus had overstepped his authority. Civil rights activists hailed him as a hero. Conservative pundits accused him of weaponizing his wealth. The plane touched down at JFK at 11:45, 15 minutes ahead of schedule. Marcus cleared customs quickly, his global entry status sparing him the usual interrogation. A black Escalade waited at the curb, Elena standing beside it with a tablet in one hand and a coffee in the other. She handed him the coffee as he approached. Thought you might need this. Marcus took it gratefully. The taste was bitter and perfect, exactly the jolt his body needed. Elena climbed into the back seat beside him, the driver pulling away from the terminal and merging into the midday traffic of the Van Wyck Expressway. Briefing. Go. Elena pulled up a document on her tablet. Garrett Aldridge has called an emergency board meeting for 3 o'clock. Aerovista stock opened at $73 this morning. It's now at $59 and falling. Analysts estimate the company has lost $2.1 billion in market cap since your video went viral. Good. Marcus, that's not good. That's catastrophic. Pension funds, retirement accounts, thousands of people are losing money because Aerovista built a business model on discriminating against passengers and got caught. Those losses aren't my responsibility, they're Aldridge's. Elena sighed. He's not going down alone. He's blaming you, the staff, and something called the Sterling Protocol. That's the profiling system. Apparently, Victor Sterling sent a memo in 2019 recommending enhanced screening for passengers from urban zip codes, passengers who paid with certain credit cards, passengers who wore specific types of clothing. The algorithm flagged 847 people in 2 years. 803 of them were black or brown. Marcus felt the rage return, cold and focused. Where's Sterling now? He went dark. Hasn't answered his phone, hasn't shown up at the office. But we found 3 former passengers who were flagged by the system. I've arranged for them to fly to New York tonight. They want to talk, set the meetings. I want their stories documented. And Elena, find out if any of them are interested in joining a class action lawsuit. Already working on it. The Escalade navigated through Midtown, the city's familiar chaos a comfort after the sterile tensions of London and Heathrow. Marcus's office was on the 42nd floor of a glass tower overlooking Bryant Park, a space designed to project power without ostentation. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, walls lined with photographs of aircraft Marcus's company had financed. No diplomas, no awards, no need to announce credentials to people who already knew. He dropped his bag on the leather sofa and stood at the window. looking down at the park where office workers ate lunch on the grass, oblivious to the battle unfolding in boardrooms across the city. His phone buzzed, a number he did not recognize. Marcus Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds, this is Scott Pelley from 60 Minutes. I'm calling to request an interview. Marcus paused. 60 Minutes was not a platform to be taken lightly. Millions of viewers, a reputation for thorough journalism, the potential to shape public opinion in ways that Twitter never could. What's the angle? We want to tell the full story, not just the confrontation, but the systemic issues, the profiling, the victims. We've already reached out to Aerovista. Garrett Aldridge declined to comment, but we have whistleblowers willing to talk. We want you to be part of the narrative. I don't need to be part of any narrative, Mr. Pelley. The facts speak for themselves. With respect, Mr. Reynolds, the facts are being twisted by people with more resources and less integrity than you. This is your chance to set the record straight. Marcus watched a pigeon land on the window ledge, its head cocking as it surveyed the park below. Power was not just about wielding authority. It was about knowing when to amplify your voice and when to let silence do the work. I'll think about it. Give me 48 hours. He hung up and turned to find Elena standing in the doorway, her expression troubled. The first victim is here, Dr. Imani Okafor. She flew in early. Bring her in. Dr. Okafor entered the office with the bearing of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. She was 38, tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that spoke of both success and careful consideration of how she would be perceived. Her handshake was firm, her eyes direct. Mr. Reynolds, thank you for seeing me. Please sit. Tell me what happened. Dr. Okafor settled into the chair across from Marcus's desk and folded her hands in her lap. The composure was practiced, a shield against the memory she was about to relive. March 2022. I was flying Aerovista from Atlanta to San Francisco for a medical conference. I'm a cardiovascular surgeon. I was in first class, seat 3B. The flight attendant, a woman named Evelyn Pritchard, brought me a meal. Chicken, I think. She set it down, looked at me and said, "That's what people like you prefer, right? The chicken?" I asked what she meant. She smiled and said, "You know, casual travelers. People who don't usually fly first class, they go for the comfort food." Marcus's jaw tightened. The same flight attendant. The same casual cruelty disguised as service. What did you do? I finished the flight in silence. Filed a complaint with Aerovista customer service. Got a form letter apologizing for any inconvenience and a $500 voucher. The complaint was marked resolved and closed. No follow-up, no investigation, no acknowledgement that what happened was discrimination. Did you use the voucher? Dr. Okafor's smile was bitter. Number one, I switched to Delta, but here's the thing, Mr. Reynolds. I'm a surgeon. I make $400,000 a year. I have status, credentials, the kind of armor that's supposed to protect you from that kind of treatment. But it didn't matter. To Evelyn Pritchard, I was just another black woman who needed to be reminded of her place. You're willing to go public with this? I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else. My daughter is 16. She wants to be a pilot. I don't want her growing up in a world where she has to prove she belongs every time she steps onto a plane. Marcus leaned forward, his voice low and steady. Then let's change that world. The second victim arrived an hour later. Mateo Ruiz Cordero, 45, an architect from Los Angeles. His story was different in the details but identical in the structure. He had been removed from a flight in 2023 after Captain Dalton Mercer accused him of smelling like alcohol. Mateo did not drink. He was sober 7 years, a fact he mentioned to the captain, who dismissed him with a wave and ordered security to escort him off. The humiliation had cost Mateo a $50,000 client and nearly cost him his sobriety. The third victim was a video call. Kenji Tanaka, 52, a professor of engineering at MIT. He appeared on the screen from his home in Cambridge, his face lined with exhaustion. His story was the darkest. In 2021, he had been flying with his 14-year-old daughter who had fallen asleep on his shoulder. A flight attendant had alerted the captain, who had notified airport security that Kenji might be trafficking the girl. They had been detained for 3 hours, his daughter crying and terrified, while police verified their relationship. The officer who processed the incident had been Wade Kensington. Marcus listened to all 3 stories, his rage crystallizing into something harder and more purposeful. This was not about one flight or one confrontation. It was about a system that had been designed to extract profit from people while treating some of them as threats by default. The algorithm Victor Sterling had created was just the codification of prejudices that had existed long before computers. Elena appeared in the doorway as the call with Kenji ended. The board meeting starts in 30 minutes. Garrett Aldridge is already there, along with the Aerovista General Counsel and half the executive team. They're preparing to offer you a settlement. I'm not interested in a settlement. Marcus, they're going to offer a lot of money. Enough to make this go away quietly. That's the problem. They want it to go away. I want it to burn so bright that every airline in the country is forced to look at what they're doing and change. He stood and straightened his tie, a charcoal silk piece that matched his suit. The transformation from the cashmere hoodie to this armor of corporate power was deliberate, a signal that he was entering the battlefield on equal terms. Elena handed him a leather folder containing the documentation they had compiled. The profiling memos, the complaint records, the financial analysis of Aerovista's discriminatory practices. Let's go remind them who holds the lease. The Aerovista headquarters occupied the top 15 floors of a building in Midtown, a monument to the golden age of aviation before the industry had been strip-mined by private equity and raced to the bottom pricing. Marcus and Elena rode the elevator to the executive floor, where Garrett Aldridge's assistant, a nervous young man with a clipboard, ushered them into a conference room. The room was designed to intimidate. 30 feet long, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, a table that could seat 20. Garrett Aldridge sat at the head, flanked by lawyers in dark suits. He was 55, silver-haired, with the kind of face that appeared trustworthy in shareholder reports. His smile was thin and strategic. Marcus, thank you for coming. I know this has been a difficult day for everyone. Marcus took a seat at the opposite end of the table, Elena beside him. He did not return the smile. Let's skip the pleasantries, Garrett. You called this meeting to offer me money to make the scandal go away. I'm here to tell you that's not happening. Aldridge's smile faded. Marcus, be reasonable. What happened on that flight was unfortunate, but it was the result of individual failures, not systemic issues. We've already suspended Evelyn Pritchard and Captain Mercer pending investigation. We're prepared to offer you a substantial settlement, a public apology, and a commitment to retraining our staff. Individual failures. That's your story. It's the truth. Marcus opened the leather folder and slid a document across the table. That's the Sterling Protocol. A memo from your regional vice president, Victor Sterling, dated October 2019. It outlines a passenger profiling system that flags travelers based on zip codes, payment methods, and clothing. The system has been in use for 5 years. It's flagged 847 passengers, 803 of whom are black or brown. Individual failures don't create a database. Aldridge glanced at the document, his face hardening. Where did you get this? That's not your concern. What you should be concerned about is the fact that I have testimony from 3 passengers who were discriminated against by your staff using this system. Dr. Imani Okafor, Mateo Ruiz Cordero, Kenji Tanaka. They're willing to go on record, they're willing to file a class action lawsuit, and I'm willing to fund it. The general counsel, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair, leaned forward. Mr. Reynolds, you're overstepping. Your authority under the lease agreement is limited to operational safety. You can't use it to wage a personal vendetta. This isn't personal, it's principle. Your airline has been violating federal civil rights law for years. The only reason it's coming to light now is because you made the mistake of discriminating against someone with the power to fight back. But I'm not fighting for me. I'm fighting for every passenger who didn't have a voice. Aldridge slammed his hand on the table. You grounded a plane in the middle of an international route. You cost us $340 million. Shareholders are calling for my head. If you think I'm going to sit here and let you destroy this company over a seat assignment, over a pattern of abuse, over a culture that treats passengers like commodities and employees like enforcers, over the fact that you hired Victor Sterling, let him build a racist algorithm and did nothing when people complained. This company deserves to be destroyed if that's the only way to fix it. The room fell silent. The lawyers exchanged glances. Aldridge's face cycled through shades of red. Elena placed a hand on Marcus's arm, a subtle reminder to modulate. But Marcus was past modulation. He had spent 42 years being told to modulate, to be patient, to wait for systems to fix themselves. He was done waiting. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to fire Victor Sterling publicly. You're going to delete the profiling system and issue a statement admitting it was discriminatory. You're going to create a $50 million settlement fund for the 847 passengers who were profiled. You're going to hire an independent third-party auditor to review every complaint filed in the last 5 years. And you're going to implement mandatory bias training for every employee, from baggage handlers to the board of directors. And if we refuse, then I terminate the master lease on all 47 aircraft, effective immediately. Your airline ceases operations within 72 hours. You file for bankruptcy by the end of the month. Choose. Aldridge stared at him, the weight of the ultimatum settling like a physical force. The general counsel whispered something in his ear. He shook his head, stood, and walked to the window, his back to the room. You're asking me to destroy my career. I'm asking you to do the right thing. If that destroys your career, maybe you were in the wrong job. The silence stretched. Outside, the city hummed with indifferent life. Finally, Aldridge turned back, his shoulders sagging. I'll take it to the board. But Marcus, if you're wrong about this, if there's no systemic issue and you've just blown up an entire company over a grudge, history will remember you as the villain. Then let history judge me. I'll take my chances. Marcus stood and walked out, Elena trailing behind. They did not speak until they were back in the Escalade, the city sliding past the windows in a blur of steel and glass. You backed him into a corner. He has no choice but to comply. Marcus stared out the window, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. Or he refuses, the airline collapses and 10,000 people lose their jobs. Either way, this is going to cost more than I wanted. But it's the cost of change, you said it yourself. Doesn't make it easier. The phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Marcus opened it and felt his chest tighten. It was a photograph of Evelyn Pritchard taken through a restaurant window. She sat alone at a table, her face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. The caption read, Karma comes for everyone, hashtag Seat 1A. Marcus deleted the text and closed his eyes. This was the part no one talked about when they celebrated justice. The collateral damage, the human cost, the way revenge bled into cruelty if you were not careful. Evelyn had made a choice, a bad one, and she deserved consequences. But watching her unravel in real time, becoming a symbol that strangers could mock and dehumanize, felt wrong in a way Marcus could not articulate. Elena noticed his expression. What is it? Nothing. Just the internet doing what it does. They drove in silence back to the office, where Marcus spent the next 3 hours on calls with lawyers, accountants, and crisis management consultants. The machine of corporate warfare ground forward, each side preparing for the battle that would play out in courtrooms and media cycles and boardrooms. By the time the sun set, Marcus was exhausted, his body screaming for rest, his mind refusing to quiet. He returned to his apartment in Tribeca, a space of clean lines and carefully curated emptiness. The view stretched across the Hudson to New Jersey, the skyline a constellation of human ambition. Marcus poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, sat on the balcony and let the August heat wrap around him like a shroud. His phone buzzed one more time. A message from Dr. Okafor. "Thank you for believing us. Whatever happens next, you've already changed the conversation." Marcus read the message 3 times, then set the phone down and stared at the city. The fight was just beginning. The trial, the media, the systemic reform, all of it lay ahead like a road with no visible end. But for the first time in hours, Marcus felt something other than rage. He felt purpose, the kind that came not from winning, but from knowing the battle was worth fighting. Tomorrow the world would wake to new headlines. Aerovista's stock would continue to plummet. Garrett Aldridge would face his board. Evelyn Pritchard would face her family. Ethan Whitmore would face a judge. And Marcus would face the question every person with power eventually confronted. What do you do when you can destroy your enemies and the only thing stopping you is the fear of becoming what you hate? He did not have an answer yet, but he knew this. When the time came to choose between justice and mercy, he would choose the option that protected the next person sitting in seat 1A. And if that made him ruthless, so be it. The world had been ruthless to him first. The subpoena arrived at Marcus's office 3 days after the confrontation, delivered by a process server who apologized for the intrusion before handing over the thick manila envelope. Elena opened it while Marcus finished a conference call with the Reynolds Aviation legal team. She read in silence, her face darkening with each page. Aerovista is suing for tortious interference, breach of fiduciary duty, and punitive damages totaling $800 million. Marcus ended the call and took the document. The complaint was a masterpiece of corporate aggression, painting him as a vindictive billionaire who had weaponized his power to destroy a company over a personal slight. Garrett Aldridge's name appeared on every other page, alongside testimonies from shareholders who had lost fortunes when the stock collapsed. The language was surgical, designed to transform Marcus from victim to villain in the court of public opinion. They're trying to make this about money instead of discrimination. Elena nodded. And they're doing it in Southern District of New York, Judge Bernard Hawkins presiding. He's known for being skeptical of civil rights claims that impact corporate profits. Marcus set the complaint down and walked to the window. 3 days since Heathrow, and the story had evolved in ways he had not fully anticipated. The video had been watched 47 million times across all platforms. Cable news had devoted entire segments to debating whether Marcus had overstepped his authority. Hashtags multiplied like viruses. Hashtag Seat 1A, hashtag Flying While Black, hashtag Corporate Accountability. The discourse was fractured and furious, with no clear consensus on whether Marcus was a hero or a tyrant. File a motion to dismiss. Argue that their losses are the direct result of their own discriminatory practices, not my response to them. Already drafted. But Marcus, this is going to trial. Aldridge isn't backing down. He's betting that a jury will side with jobs and shareholders over civil rights. Then we give them a reason to choose differently. The first whistleblower emerged on the 5th day. His name was Desmond Yamamoto, the junior flight attendant who had witnessed the confrontation and said nothing. He appeared on CNN with Anderson Cooper, his face gaunt with sleeplessness, his hands trembling as he spoke. I should have stopped it. I knew what Evelyn was doing was wrong. I knew Captain Mercer wasn't following protocol. But I was scared. Scared of losing my job, scared of being labeled a troublemaker, scared of what would happen if I challenged people who had been in the industry for decades. Anderson Cooper leaned forward, his voice gentle but probing. You're speaking out now. Why? Because I watched that video and I saw myself. Not Mr. Reynolds, not Evelyn, but me. standing there doing nothing, complicit. I've been that person my entire career, and I can't be that person anymore. What do you want people to know? That the Sterling Protocol wasn't a secret. Everyone knew about it. We had training sessions where Victor Sterling himself explained how to identify high-risk passengers. He used words like urban demographics and non-traditional travelers, but we all understood what he meant. He was teaching us how to discriminate without using slurs. The interview went viral within hours. Aerovista's stock dropped another 9%. Garrett Aldridge issued a statement calling Desmond a disgruntled employee seeking attention. But the damage was done. Other employees began coming forward, anonymous at first, then publicly. Flight attendants, gate agents, even pilots, all confirming that the profiling system was not an isolated failure but company policy. Marcus watched the interviews from his office, Elena beside him, both of them silent as the testimony accumulated. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Hundreds of employees, thousands of passengers, years of systematic abuse hidden beneath the veneer of customer service. And at the center of it all, Victor Sterling, the architect of the algorithm, still missing. Where is he? Elena pulled up a report on her tablet. Last confirmed sighting was 4 days ago in Newark. He withdrew $20,000 in cash from his personal account, closed his corporate credit cards, and disappeared. FBI is treating it as potential flight risk. You think he'll run? I think he knows what's coming. When this goes to trial, every email, every memo, every line of code he wrote will be evidence. He's looking at federal charges, civil liability, the end of everything. If I were him, I'd run too. Marcus turned back to the window. The city below pulsed with its usual indifference, millions of people moving through their lives unaware that in boardrooms and courtrooms across Manhattan, the architecture of accountability was being constructed one testimony at a time. Elena's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and her eyes widened. Judge Ramona Delgado just took over the case. Hawkins recused himself after someone leaked emails showing he owns Aerovista stock. Marcus felt a flicker of hope. Delgado was a federal judge appointed 5 years earlier, a former public defender with a reputation for being tough on corporate malfeasance. She had made her name prosecuting employment discrimination cases and had written scathing opinions on companies that hid behind arbitration clauses to avoid accountability. When's the first hearing? November 20th, 3 months from now. Then we have 3 months to build a case they can't dismiss. The work consumed him. Marcus spent 18-hour days coordinating with lawyers, reviewing documents, interviewing victims. The 3 original plaintiffs, Dr. Okafor, Mateo, and Kenji, became the foundation of a class action lawsuit that grew to include 42 additional passengers. Each had a story, a moment when they had been flagged by the Sterling Protocol and subjected to treatment that ranged from humiliating to traumatic. There was Carmen Rodriguez, a schoolteacher from Phoenix who had been pulled aside for additional screening because her last name and zip code triggered the algorithm. She had missed her father's funeral. There was David Kim, a software engineer who had been accused of carrying explosives because his backpack contained circuit boards for a robotics competition. He was 12 years old. There was Jasmine Washington, a nurse who had been removed from a flight because a passenger complained she looked threatening. She had been wearing scrubs. Marcus met with each of them, listened to their stories, and felt the weight of their pain settle into his bones. This was not abstract. This was not strategy. These were human beings who had been reduced to data points in an algorithm designed to maximize profit by minimizing the comfort of certain passengers. The trial preparation revealed patterns that made Marcus's rage calcify into something colder and more focused. Victor Sterling had not acted alone. He had received approval from senior executives, including Garrett Aldridge, who had signed off on the protocol in a 2019 board meeting. The minutes were damning. VP Sterling's proposal to enhance passenger screening for non-traditional demographics is approved contingent on maintaining plausible deniability in customer communications. Plausible deniability. The words appeared in 17 different documents, always in the context of avoiding lawsuits while implementing policies that everyone involved knew were discriminatory. Marcus's legal team prepared a motion to add Aldridge personally to the lawsuit, arguing that he had created a corporate culture that incentivized discrimination. Elena brought him the news on a Friday afternoon in October, the city outside his window already darkening as autumn settled in. Garrett Aldridge has agreed to testify in exchange for reduced personal liability. Marcus looked up from the contract he was reviewing. He's turning on his own company? He's saving his own skin. He'll testify that Sterling acted independently, that the board was misled about the scope of the profiling, that senior management tried to shut it down once they learned the truth. It's a lie, but it's a lie that might keep him out of prison. And Sterling? Still missing. But the FBI found his car abandoned near the Canadian border. They think he tried to cross and got turned back. There's a warrant out now. Federal marshals are actively searching. Marcus stood and walked to the window. Below, the evening rush spilled across the streets. Taillights bleeding into the darkness. Somewhere in that vast machinery of human movement, Victor Sterling was running, knowing that every minute of freedom was borrowed time. Marcus felt no sympathy. Sterling had built his career on the assumption that people like Marcus could be profiled, flagged, and discarded without consequence. Now the consequences had found him, and there was no algorithm to predict his way out. The trial began on November 20th in the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan. The courtroom was a cathedral of marble and wood, designed to project the weight of institutional authority. Judge Ramona Delgado presided from the bench, her dark eyes scanning the room with the intensity of someone who had seen every variation of legal theater and was not impressed by any of it. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table with his legal team, a group of 8 attorneys led by Vanessa Cortez, a civil rights litigator who had spent 2 decades dismantling corporate discrimination. Across the aisle, Aerovista's lawyers occupied twice as much space, their suits expensive, their expressions confident. Garrett Aldridge sat among them, his face carefully neutral, the performance of a man wronged rather than complicit. Delgado called the court to order and turned her attention to the plaintiffs. Ms. Cortez, your opening statement. Vanessa stood, her movements deliberate, her voice carrying the cadence of someone who had argued 100 cases and won most of them. Your Honor, this case is about power, specifically the power of a corporation to treat human beings as problems to be managed rather than customers to be served. For 5 years, Aerovista Airlines operated a passenger profiling system called the Sterling Protocol. This system flagged travelers based on race, zip code, payment method, and clothing. It subjected 847 passengers to discriminatory treatment ranging from invasive searches to removal from flights. The company knew about it, they approved it, they profited from it, and when they were caught, they tried to destroy the man who exposed them. We are here to prove that discrimination is not a business strategy, and accountability is not negotiable. The defense attorney, a man named Roger Kensington with silver hair and a voice like gravel, rose for his rebuttal. Your Honor, this case is about a man who used his wealth to punish a company for a single employee's error in judgment. Mr. Reynolds grounded a plane, cost thousands of passengers their travel plans, and triggered a financial collapse that wiped out billions in shareholder value. The so-called Sterling Protocol was an isolated initiative by a rogue employee, Victor Sterling, who has since fled prosecution. Aerovista is a victim here, not a perpetrator. Delgado listened without expression, then gestured for both sides to sit. Let's be clear. This court does not care about shareholder value. This court cares about the law. If the evidence shows systematic discrimination, the financial consequences are irrelevant. Proceed with your witnesses, Ms. Cortez. The first week of testimony established the foundation. Dr. Imani Okafor took the stand and recounted her experience with Evelyn Pritchard, her voice steady despite the tears that gathered in her eyes. Mateo Ruiz Cordero described being removed from a flight and nearly losing his sobriety in the aftermath. Kenji Tanaka testified about the terror on his daughter's face when armed officers separated them, the way she still flinched at airports 2 years later. The defense cross-examined aggressively, trying to paint each incident as a misunderstanding or an overreaction. But Vanessa had prepared her witnesses well. They did not waver. They did not embellish. They simply told the truth, and the truth was devastating. The second week brought the whistleblowers. Desmond Yamamoto testified about the training sessions where Sterling had taught staff to identify passengers who did not belong in first class. Other flight attendants corroborated his account, some tearfully admitting they had participated in the discrimination without questioning it. Gate agents produced emails showing that complaints about the Sterling protocol had been dismissed or buried by regional managers. The courtroom gallery filled with spectators and press. Reporters scribbled notes. Victims watched from the back rows, their faces a mixture of vindication and grief. Outside, protesters gathered on the courthouse steps, holding signs that read, "No more flying while black," and "Dignity is not negotiable." Marcus testified on the 9th day. Vanessa led him through his story with precision, starting with the microaggressions at Heathrow and building to the confrontation on the plane. Marcus kept his voice even, his emotions controlled, but the weight of the testimony was palpable. When he described the moment Ethan Whitmore told him to go to the back where he belonged, the courtroom went slant. "What did you feel in that moment, Mr. Reynolds?" Marcus paused, considering the question. He had been asked this 100 times by journalists and lawyers and friends, but sitting in the witness box, under oath, with the eyes of the court upon him, the answer felt different. I felt tired. Not physically, though I was exhausted, but tired of proving I belong, tired of carrying 3 forms of identification to validate my existence. Tired of watching people who look like me get erased from spaces we built and paid for. I felt tired and I felt powerful, and I realized those 2 things could coexist. So I made a choice. I used the power I had earned to stop what was happening, not just to me, but to everyone who had been through this before and everyone who would come after. The defense attorney cross-examined with calculated aggression, trying to portray Marcus as vengeful and reckless. "Mr. Reynolds, you grounded a plane carrying 300 passengers. You cost the airline hundreds of millions of dollars. You destroyed the livelihoods of employees who had nothing to do with the Sterling protocol. Do you feel any remorse?" "I feel remorse for the employees who were misled by their leadership. I feel remorse for the passengers whose travel was disrupted. But I don't feel remorse for holding a corporation accountable for systematic discrimination. If the price of justice is inconvenience, I'll pay that price every time." The attorney pressed harder. "But you're not the one paying the price, are you? You're a billionaire. You can afford to wage this war. What about the gate agents who lost their jobs? The shareholders who lost their retirement savings? Do they deserve to suffer for one executive's mistakes?" Marcus leaned forward, his voice sharpening. "They're not suffering because of me. They're suffering because Garrett Aldridge and Victor Sterling built a company on a foundation of discrimination and hoped no one would notice. I noticed. I had the power to act. I acted. If you want to blame someone for the consequences, blame the people who created the problem." The exchange was replayed on every news network that night. Legal analysts debated whether Marcus had been too aggressive, too uncompromising, but the victims who had testified saw it differently. Dr. Okafor sent Marcus a text. "Thank you for not apologizing, for demanding we be treated like human beings." The third week brought the documents. Vanessa introduced emails, memos, board minutes, and lines of code from the Sterling protocol itself. The algorithm was dissected in excruciating detail, each variable explained, each bias exposed. Expert witnesses testified about the statistical impossibility of the flagging patterns being random. A data scientist from MIT demonstrated that the protocol was 94% accurate in predicting race based on the criteria Sterling had programmed. The defense tried to argue that the algorithm was designed to enhance security, not discriminate. But when Vanessa cross-examined Aerovista's chief technology officer, the facade crumbled. Mr. Brennan, can you explain why the Sterling protocol flagged passengers from zip codes with majority black populations at 17 times the rate of majority white zip codes? The officer hesitated. I believe that reflects crime statistics in those areas. Crime statistics. So Aerovista's position is that living in a certain neighborhood makes someone a security threat? No, I didn't say that, but the algorithm did. It said exactly that, and your company deployed it for 5 years without questioning whether it was legal or ethical. Correct? I wasn't involved in the decision to deploy it, but you maintained the system. You approved updates, you reviewed the flagging reports. At what point did you ask whether this was discrimination? Silence. The officer stared at his hands. Delgado called a recess before he could answer, but the damage was done. The prosecution rested after 3 weeks. The defense called Garrett Aldridge to the stand, and Marcus watched as the CEO performed the final act of corporate self-preservation. Aldridge testified that he had been deceived by Victor Sterling, that the board had never understood the scope of the profiling, that senior management had tried to intervene once they learned the truth. It was a masterclass in deflection. Every answer calibrated to shift blame away from himself and onto the missing executive. Vanessa destroyed him on cross-examination. She produced emails showing Aldridge had personally approved budgets for the Sterling protocol. She introduced testimony from former board members who confirmed that Aldridge had championed the system as a way to reduce complaints from high-value passengers. She played a recording of a 2021 shareholder call, where Aldridge had praised the company's ability to maintain premium experiences for frequent flyers. By the time Vanessa finished, Aldridge looked smaller, his suit hanging loose on a frame that had visibly diminished over the course of the trial. He left the stand without meeting Marcus's eyes. The jury deliberated for 4 days. Marcus spent the time in his office, unable to focus on anything except the seconds ticking toward a verdict. Elena brought him food he did not eat. His lawyers called with updates that contained no new information. The media speculated endlessly, pundits predicting outcomes based on tea leaves and gut feelings. On the 4th day, the call came. The jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity when Delgado read the decision. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table, his hands folded, his face expressionless. Behind him, Dr. Okafor, Mateo, Kenji, and the other victims filled the gallery. The tension was suffocating. Delgado's voice cut through the silence. On the charge of systematic discrimination in violation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, we find the defendant, Aerovista Airlines, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to deprive individuals of their civil rights, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of corporate negligence resulting in emotional distress, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Victims sobbed. Reporters sprinted for the exits. Marcus remained seated, his eyes closed, feeling the weight of 3 months lift from his shoulders. Delgado gavelled for silence and continued. The jury awards compensatory damages in the amount of $200 million to be distributed among the verified victims. The jury awards punitive damages in the amount of $500 million to be paid into a federal oversight fund ensuring compliance with anti-discrimination measures. Additionally, Aerovista Airlines is hereby ordered to dissolve the Sterling Protocol, submit to independent auditing for 5 years, and implement mandatory civil rights training for all employees. The gallery erupted again. This time, Delgado allowed it. Marcus stood and shook hands with Vanessa and the legal team, then turned to face the victims. Dr. Okafor embraced him, her tears soaking into his suit jacket. Mateo gripped his hand and whispered thanks. Kenji nodded from across the room, his daughter beside him, both of them smiling through tears. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed. Marcus stood at the microphone, flanked by his legal team and the victims who had testified. Today, a jury confirmed what we already knew. Discrimination is not a business strategy. Accountability is not optional. For 5 years, Aerovista Airlines treated passengers like data points in an algorithm designed to maximize comfort for some at the expense of dignity for others. That ends now. This verdict sends a message to every corporation that profits from prejudice. You will be caught, you will be held accountable, and you will pay. A reporter shouted a question. "Mr. Reynolds, do you regret grounding the plane?" Marcus looked directly into the camera. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that we live in a world where a man has to own a plane to be treated with respect on one. But I don't regret using the power I have to protect people who didn't have power. That's not revenge, that's responsibility." The press conference ended and Marcus returned to his office. The city had moved on, the evening rush already underway, the machinery of commerce indifferent to the verdict that had just reshaped an industry. But inside his office, Marcus allowed himself a moment of stillness. He poured a glass of whiskey and stood at the window, watching the lights flicker on across Manhattan. His phone buzzed, a message from an unfamiliar number. "They found Sterling. Canadian authorities arrested him trying to cross into Quebec. He's being extradited tomorrow." Marcus read the message twice, then deleted it. Sterling's capture was inevitable, the final domino in a collapse that had started the moment Marcus refused to move from seat 1A. There would be another trial, more testimony, more consequences. But for now, the immediate battle was over. The weeks after the verdict brought a cascade of systemic changes. Aerovista's board voted to remove Garrett Aldridge and install a new CEO, Maria Sanchez, the first Latina to lead a major American airline. Sanchez's first act was to publicly apologize to every passenger who had been profiled and to announce the creation of a passenger bill of rights that included independent oversight of discrimination complaints. 23 other airlines adopted similar policies within a month, terrified that they would be the next target of a civil rights lawsuit. The FAA issued new directives requiring quarterly audits of passenger treatment data, specifically looking for patterns that suggested profiling. Senator Elizabeth Warren introduced legislation called the Air Travel Dignity Act, which codified many of the reforms into federal law. The bill passed with bipartisan support in February 2025. Marcus watched the reforms take shape from his office, tracking the metrics that mattered. Discrimination complaints across the industry dropped 64% in the first 6 months. Passenger satisfaction surveys showed significant improvement among travelers of color. The culture was shifting, slowly, imperfectly, but unmistakably. Elena appeared in his doorway one afternoon in March, holding a folder. "You have a visitor. She says she needs to speak with you personally." Marcus looked up. "Who?" "Evelyn Pritchard." The name landed like a stone. Marcus had not seen or spoken to Evelyn since the confrontation at Heathrow. He knew from news reports that she had been fired, that her face had become a meme symbolizing corporate racism, that her life had imploded in the months since the video went viral. He did not know what she wanted now, and part of him did not want to find out. "Send her in." Evelyn entered slowly, her movements tentative. She had aged in the months since Heathrow, her face lined with stress, her auburn hair now streaked with more gray than color. She wore a simple dress, no makeup, no armor. She stood in front of Marcus's desk and did not sit. "Thank you for seeing me." Marcus gestured to the chair. She sat, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes downcast. "I don't know why I'm here. I don't know what I expect you to say. But I needed to tell you that I'm sorry. Not because my lawyers told me to apologize, not because I think it will change anything, but because it's true. I was wrong. I treated you as less than human because it was easier than challenging the system I was part of. I told myself I was just doing my job, following protocol, keeping the peace, but the truth is I was scared. Scared of losing my status, my authority, my comfortable place in a hierarchy that rewarded me for being complicit. Marcus listened without interrupting. Evelyn continued, her voice cracking. "I lost everything, my job, my marriage, my reputation. My kids won't speak to me. Strangers recognize me in grocery stores and call me names. I've applied for 100 jobs and been rejected from all of them because my face is the first thing that comes up when you search my name. I'm living in a studio apartment, working at a gas station, trying to figure out how to rebuild a life I destroyed. And I deserved it. I deserve all of it. But I need you to know that I see it now. I see what I did. I see the harm I caused, and I'm sorry." Marcus studied her, this woman who had been the instrument of his humiliation, now reduced to the same vulnerability she had once inflicted on others. He felt no satisfaction in her suffering, no vindication in her apology, only the tired recognition that punishment and transformation were not the same thing. "What do you want from me, Evelyn?" "I don't want anything. I just needed to say this to your face. You were right. I was wrong. And I'm sorry." She stood and turned to leave. Marcus's voice stopped her. "Evelyn." She turned back, her eyes red. "Sorry doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't give back the dignity you took from me or the 847 other passengers your company profiled. But it's a start. If you want to rebuild your life, don't do it by pretending this didn't happen. Do it by making sure it never happens again. Volunteer, advocate, use what you learned to teach others. Otherwise, you're just another person who said sorry and moved on." Evelyn nodded. Tears streaming down her face, she left without another word, and Marcus returned to the window, watching the city absorb her into its anonymous expanse. The final chapter arrived on August 15th, 2026, exactly 2 years after the confrontation at Heathrow. Marcus had not planned to mark the anniversary, but Elena reminded him that he was scheduled to speak at an aviation industry conference in Chicago. The theme was diversity and inclusion, and his presence was meant to symbolize the progress that had been made. Marcus flew commercial, deliberately choosing a different airline every time to observe how the reforms were being implemented. This time, it was United. He checked in online, arrived at JFK 2 hours early, and moved through security without incident. No extra screening, no suspicious glances, just the routine choreography of air travel. He sat in the gate area reading the same espionage novel he had tried to finish 2 years earlier. The story no longer held his attention. He knew how it ended now. The spy succeeded, but at a cost that made victory feel hollow. Marcus wondered if the author had intended that as commentary or if it was just the inevitable result of stories about power. Boarding began, and Marcus joined the line for first class. As he approached the gate, he noticed a young man, maybe 24, standing to the side with a nervous expression. The man was black, dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt that looked new. He held his boarding pass in both hands, staring at it as if it might disappear. Marcus recognized the look. It was the expression of someone entering a space they had been taught did not belong to them. "First time flying first class?" The young man startled, then nodded. "Yes, sir. I'm going to Chicago for a job interview." "Tech company. They flew me out, upgraded the ticket. I keep thinking someone's going to tell me it's a mistake." Marcus smiled. "It's not a mistake. You earned it. What's your seat?" 1A. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of symmetry too perfect to be coincidence. He pulled out his own boarding pass and showed it to the young man. "I'm in 2A, right behind you." They boarded together, the young man still visibly anxious. The flight attendant, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes, greeted them warmly and helped stow their bags. No suspicion, no extra verification, just service. Marcus settled into his seat and watched the young man in front of him relax incrementally as the flight prepared for departure. When the attendant came by with pre-departure beverages, she offered champagne. The young man accepted, his hands still shaking slightly. Marcus thought about the distance between where he stood now and where he had been 2 years ago. The lawsuits, the trial, the verdict, the reforms, all of it had started because he refused to accept that his dignity was negotiable. And now, a young man who might have faced the same discrimination was sitting in seat 1A without fear, not because the world had become perfect, but because enough people had decided that silence was no longer acceptable. The plane took off, climbing through the clouds until New York was a memory below. Marcus pulled out his book but did not read. Instead, he thought about the janitor at Heathrow, the man who had returned his wallet and whose son was now studying at Cambridge on a scholarship Marcus had quietly funded. He thought about Dr. Okafor's daughter, who had enrolled in flight school and would graduate next year. He thought about Desmond Yamamoto, who now worked for Reynolds Aviation Leasing as the head of diversity and inclusion, using his experience to train employees across the industry. The fight was not over. Discrimination did not disappear because of one verdict or one set of reforms, but the architecture of accountability had been built, and every time someone refused to move, every time someone demanded dignity, the structure grew stronger. When the plane landed in Chicago, Marcus waited for the young man to gather his things. They walked off together, and in the terminal the young man stopped. "Mr. Reynolds, right? I saw the news coverage. What you did changed things for people like me." Marcus shook his head. "What I did was use power I was lucky enough to have. The real change came from people like Dr. Okafor and Mateo and Kenji and Desmond. They were the ones who testified, who relived their trauma, who refused to let the world forget. I just made a phone call, but you made the call. A lot of people with power don't." Marcus considered this. The truth was more complicated than heroism or villainy. He had acted out of rage and exhaustion and the specific privilege of knowing he could not be erased. But the result had mattered, and maybe that was enough. If you ever face something like I did, promise me you'll fight back, not for revenge, but because your dignity matters. The young man nodded, his eyes bright with determination. "I promise." They parted ways at baggage claim. Marcus watched him disappear into the crowd, carrying his future in a backpack and a boarding pass that said he belonged. Marcus collected his own bag and walked outside into the August heat, Chicago humid and alive around him. His phone buzzed. A news alert. Victor Sterling sentenced to 7 years federal prison for civil rights violations. Marcus read the headline and felt nothing. Sterling's punishment was deserved but incomplete. No amount of prison time would erase the harm he had caused or restore the dignity he had stolen. Justice was not a transaction where punishment equaled absolution. It was a process, ongoing and imperfect, that required constant vigilance. Elena had sent a message. Garrett Aldridge filed for bankruptcy. Aerovista stock recovered to 80% of pre-scandal value. Maria Sanchez is being profiled in Forbes as the CEO who saved the airline. Marcus replied, "Good. Let them tell that story. We know the truth." He climbed into a cab and gave the driver the address of the conference center. The event would be full of executives eager to claim credit for reforms they had resisted until forced to implement them. But Marcus would speak anyway, not because he expected gratitude, but because the work of changing culture required showing up even when it was uncomfortable. The cab merged into traffic, Chicago's skyline rising ahead. Marcus closed his eyes and let the motion carry him forward, knowing that somewhere in the vast machinery of human movement, another person was sitting in seat 1A, unaware of the fight that had been waged so they could sit there without proving they belonged. Power was not in the seat, it was in the refusal to move, and as long as people kept refusing, the world would keep changing, one uncomfortable conversation at a time.